Welcome back to CirriusTalk Agentic AI. I'm Greg Banks, your host. Thanks for joining us today. If you spend any time on LinkedIn, you've probably whiplashed between hand AI the keys, it can do anything, and the sky is falling, trust nothing. The truth most likely lives somewhere in the middle, and today we map that out. Tim Hartig and Gavin Franklin are back, joining me to break down the real security picture around AI dev tools like Claude Code, Codex, and Copilot. We get practical about which fears are overstated, which risks deserve monitoring, and the act now threats like prompt injection and 6 mitigation principles you can put in place this week. Whether you're technical or non-technical, you'll leave with a framework that does not age out. All right, let's dive right in. Welcome back to CirriusTalk Agentic AI, Gavin and Tim. Good to have you in the studio today.
Yeah, great to be here.
Looking forward to it.
It's a Monday all the way around, isn't it, guys?
Yes, it is.
We're gonna do a little different angle at this today. I know we've talked about a variety of topics on Agentic AI, and I don't know about the rest of the world out there, but if you spend as much time on LinkedIn as I do, and you're not just utterly confused by trying to determine the temperature of how things are going, then you know something I don't, please reach out to me. On one side, it seems like everybody's ready to hand the keys over and just give them to AI. It can do everything. There's nothing it can't do. Trust it. You're good. And on the other side, I'm having flashbacks to watching Chicken Little with my kids and the sky is falling. You just can't trust anything. And there's probably some truth in both of those sides, I guess. But Gavin is kind of taking a really good detailed slant of when you're considering implementation. There are some things that you probably can't ignore, some things that you probably should monitor, and some other things you really need to stop and have a conversation about this. And I won't go any further with breaking down where we're going to go in the episode, but there's a great artifact that literally breaks these levels of inquiry and whatnot down. So hand over to you guys, but thanks again for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a topic we've touched on a couple times in the podcast. I think that's because it's really important in terms of the potential business impact. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Greg. Like when it comes to AI tools, it's either, hey, this is changing everything. It's amazing, greatest thing that's to happen to us in our lifetime. And then you have the other side where it's, the sky is falling, doom and gloom in terms of, especially when you're talking around security and the risks. And I think, as we find with so many topics, the truth is somewhere in the middle. And so that's what we'll cover. And typically, to how we approach other topics as well, we want to take a principled approach. What is some of the core principles you got to keep in mind? From there, then we want to work through those different principles and then have some actual practical applications that you can take back to your business. Whether you're technical or non-technical, what are some practical things that you can take back to make sure that you're staying in line and avoiding maybe some of the common and realistic security concerns that you can have with AI. We're going to refer and talk a lot around security concerns with AI dev tools. The reason for that is deliberate. Some of the most envelope pushing use cases with AI is around dev tools like Claude Code, Codex, and Copilot. But as I'm sure everybody's come to realize at this point now, dev tools are being used for much more than just development work. This is even if you're using these tools for knowledge work as well, and these same principles apply. And I think the big reason, though, why there's a lot around the security of leveraging these dev tools like a Claude Code or Codex is because these tools actually give access to AI to your computer, right? Which opens up a host of different things that can happen there. So that's where we're really going to focus today. And yeah, Gavin, maybe you kick us off with kind of what's the core principle we should keep in mind at the center of all this when we're talking about dev tools and security for businesses.
Yeah, I think that it's important to come at this at an understanding of where the risks are, what we're seeing from almost a percentage perspective on what's being introduced, because AI is introducing new security vulnerabilities that we haven't seen before in the ecosystem. However, I will say that more of the security problems that we see with AI are existing security vulnerabilities. What I mean by that is the AI tools that you run locally on your machine, it cannot do anything that you cannot do, right? So even when interacting with third-party tools, let's say you have it connected to your CRM, your ERP, it's connected through your user, right? So all of those security principles you put in place around field level security, record level security, data security in general, that is all still in place when you utilize these AI tools. In reality, what we're seeing is AI is just allowing people to do things faster. And when you put somebody in front of any tool set, over time, there will be some sort of mistake that's made. So AI is producing the good at a fast pace and the bad at a fast pace. So it's just exposing what I think are security vulnerabilities that have already existed within the structure of your systems. But there are other security threats that are occurring because of AI being looped into development, being looped into knowledge acquisition, things like that. So things like prompt injection, we'll dive into those and where AI can get a little bit more risky.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good place to start. And I think, as you said, like, well, let's start maybe with overstated fears, because I think when it comes to security, I think it's really common to just overstate lots of things, make it sound like, hey, it's so insecure, like it's dangerous every time you use it, et cetera. So let's just start there. Where is there common overstated fears when it comes to AI security and kind of dev tool use?
Yeah, the big one I hear a lot is AI tools accessing the internet. Right. There's a lot of horror stories out there. I specifically remember conversations with like Moldbook is a really good example of this, where AI is going on the internet and speaking with other AI agents and potentially going and accessing dangerous or unsecure sites, or maybe even your own systems. Right. What's important to know is that these tools, things like Cloud Code, Codex, they exist on your local machine and inherently by default do not access the internet. You have to give it permission. And when you tell it to go do research, it'll tell you the exact site it's going to go do that research on, and you have to give it permission to do so. Additionally, a lot of people are really concerned that there could be file deletions or corruption to their local machine. Any sort of file changes, right, are going to be required for permission, just like internet searches, with some exceptions. You can elevate the permission of your AI assistant with Cloud Code, with Codex, to go in and make changes without you giving them permission. However, I will also say it will not allow you to skip permissions to push things to a repo. So things like commits, assisting with merges, creating those pull requests. Those are things that is very much so the human in the loop first, because they're worried about that. Another fear that I think I would say it's a slightly warranted fear is code quality degradation. Right. So the fear that you're going to hear from a lot of development teams is the AI is not writing very good code. There's some truth behind that sometimes, and there's some kind of silliness behind it as well, because all of this code is still reviewable. If you're using your CI/CD pipeline appropriately, there will be human in the loop for your coding, right? So the idea here is, yes, you can generate the code faster, but we've seen this over the last half a year. Our developers have become reviewers, and there's just that reality is becoming more and more every day, right? So the code can be generated very quickly and it needs to be reviewed. And then lastly, I'll say streaming data to vendors in real time, right? So they're kind of, I've heard concerns of, I download Cloud Code, Claude now has access to everything on my machine, and Anthropic can train on that. That is not inherently true. Anthropic, in some circumstances, can train on the context that you provide to the model when you're communicating with it. Same thing with OpenAI, but they do not inherently then have access to every file on your computer to train on all of your local data. So that is not the case. And Tim, you're...
Yep, very helpful. And yeah, and I think it's worth also saying, if you go and run Claude Code on dangerously skip permissions or OpenAI, then you are inherently putting yourself at risk for some of those. But if you are running with the built-in security apparatus that those tools come with, then these are definitely overstated fears. If you're going to make the decision to override it, then that's you owning that decision. Not saying don't do it all the time. Sometimes maybe it does make sense if you're going to sit and watch it, or it's a low risk use case. But I think this comes back to a principle that I'm really passionate about, and it's using AI does not absolve you of the results of the work that you do. You still own the output of what you're doing. And if you have that mindset, you actually kind of can prevent all of these issues from even happening in the first place. All of these security issues, or I'll say most of these here, happen only if you're using AI as an unvalidated output for your work and assuming that you are not responsible for the work that AI puts out in your name. So I think if you just adopt that as a general principle, then you're going to be in a pretty good spot pretty much across the board. But anyways, we talked about overstated fears, moving over then to moderate risk. So definitely here, now we're getting into the, hey, here's some things that definitely do warrant attention and that you should be aware of to pay attention to. And where do we want to start with there, Gavin?
Yeah. So kind of going back to what I was saying previously, I think honestly, the biggest risk of AI is how fast it is. And since it's so quick, like I said, it can generate the good and it can generate the bad, right? So what you're going to see is insecure code patterns generated at scale, right? And that doesn't mean AI is just pumping out a bunch of insecure code. It just means that it's pumping out so much code that you're going to need someone to detect when something is amiss, right?
And frankly, pumping out code that probably humans in many cases would have written themselves too, but because it was getting written at a much smaller volume, it gets caught much easier because they wrote it, they know it, and then they caught it at some point, whether that was themselves. I mean, people say, oh, well, AI just sucks at writing code. It's like, well, actually, in terms of one-shotting, it's probably better than many developers in one-shot. But the reality is they catch it because they're reviewing it dozens of times. You're working on smaller amounts of code, et cetera. So I think that's also an interesting line to kind of think through.
Yeah, it's a conversation I've had with quite a few developers too, where some developers will say, hey, AI is generating insecure code. And then another developer will say, yeah, I've probably done it 10 to 20 times over the last X amount of years. Like there's so many security vulnerability risks that AI is detecting nowadays in a very foundational software that we have across the ecosystem, right? So I don't think that AI is worse at writing code because it produces bugs. It's just we can't rely 100% on AI to catch those bugs, right? So that's where the review process comes in. The other thing I'll say is when we talk about that context window, right? So we said previously, AI doesn't have access, like Anthropic, OpenAI won't have access to files in your machine just because you have those tools. But anything you give into context, they do have access to. They will partially store that data depending on quite a few different principles, which we'll go over, but there is possibilities that they could be training on that data. So if you do have proprietary software, if you do have things on your local machine that you don't want to hand over to those companies, you have to be very careful about what you're including in your context window. What you're allowing AI to bring into whenever you say, hey, I want you to review this code. It might go and look at a bunch of files within the folder structure to review that code. So you have to be careful about that. And you have to be careful about where you apply hooks. And this is going to keep going back to, I'm going to keep coming back to this as we go on. You're always going to be in the moderate risk or high risk areas if you don't have an AI implementation plan in mind, right? If it's just Wild West, a scenario of utilizing AI, you're constantly going to be behind the security aspect of it. But if you approach AI appropriately, then these things won't necessarily be as big of a problem for you. Another thing we see, this is one that I think is an actual issue that could happen and has been happening, is malicious code in plugin friendly repos, right? So there is a ton of stuff being shared on the internet right now for AI agents. Right, we all heard OpenClaw, various other tools. You could just go to these repos and some of the most committed repos in history. You have to be careful about what you're just inherently bringing onto your local machine. Make sure that it's vendor-approved repos, that you're at least going through and monitoring what's being added onto your local machine. When we talk about things like prompt injection, when we talk about things like malware, this is where that can come. And then lastly, I think this is a huge one, and it's continuously growing in issues, I would say, is unexpected cost overruns without usage controls. So agentic loops that we see go and do this coding task or this large research task or building slide deck tasks. If there's no implementation plan in place and know where is the future of our company going with AI, you're going to run into cost barriers. And the question should always be, how do I plan for that? And where are the appropriate tools to use in order for our implementation to scale up?
Yeah. Going back to the code and public extensions and repos. I mean, that's a huge one. I mean, there's so much cool stuff being published by people all over the place. And it's like, kind of going back to your college days, it's like, you got to go validate the source. Like if you're going to use it, then you got to go make sure, is this peer reviewed? Is it from a reliable source? Like, have I read and looked through it? So even if you're a small business where maybe you don't have an IT team to go through and vet everything, right? Do your own due diligence there. Like, stick to vendor approved repos. Like, if I'm going to go and create a really common one, I think a lot of people do, would be like Gmail, Google, Gmail or Workspace connections. There's a whole bunch of third-party ones out there. There is nothing behind those in terms of like you knowing whether that's secure or not, unless you go through line by line and actually evaluate all of the code, or you could use the official Google CLI, right? Which is backed by Google, has, they've said it's secure to use, et cetera. And then you still have certain considerations of that. So it's like, it's very in vogue right now to just go find it and try it out. Again, that's part of what's like a lot of fun in the AI space right now is like, it's like anybody can go try anything, but just know that that comes with risks. And again, you're responsible for the work that you do. So if you're going to go try a third-party tool on GitHub, it very well could have some very real risks there. And so if you're using it for your business, if you don't unless you've had your IT team look over it and validate that in very close detail, then stick with approved vendors, stick with things that you've heard from reputable sources that have vouched for certain things as well, and be very deliberate with that, because I think that's a really common one across the board. But yeah, so we talked around kind of moderate risk, all right, high risk. So what are things that people need to act on like right now?
Yeah. So right at the top of everyone's mind is prompt injection, and prompt injection is a real thing. It is definitely occurring every day now. We see AI has been a boost to security practices, but it has also exposed us to a whole new form of hacking. And prompt injection is essentially the idea of anything that you bring externally into any sort of LLM can influence the actual prompt, because these LLMs are just reading everything as context into one big file format. So prompt injection is the idea that somebody is taking some sort of external input that you're providing to the LLM and putting actual instructions in there for the AI to read. So you might think that you're pulling in an article from a web page in order to research something, but inside that article itself is instructions for an AI, just in case an AI agent were to read it. So definitely a big risk, and you're going to see there's potential for this in PR titles, commit messages, and READMEs, so things that you would see from public or even internal repos. Tickets, if you have AI evaluating IT tickets, this is something, if your ticket website isn't secure and somebody externally goes to submit a ticket, they could implement prompt injection, right? So again, just those external layers of security are now more important now when you put AI agents on.
And I think it is useful to call out, though, that like Anthropic and OpenAI do have prompt injection controls in their own harnesses. So, Claude Code or Codex, in theory, will catch blatant examples of prompt injection. But again, there's other people using AI to get around AI, so it's not perfect. And so that's where you have to be aware of the risk and have those basic controls. So you have multiple layers of security, because there are aspects where prompt injection is getting through even the harnesses that have been put in place from Codex and Claude Code. But yeah, I think it is useful to call out that there's something is in place. It's not, just blatant, the model's going to go act on whatever it finds, but there is creative ways that people are able to get around that, which is why you should be very, very focused on the details here.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll say is it's not like injecting a prompt is going to all of a sudden cause some sort of havoc scenario on every LLM usage, right? So this is where you just reiterate it's really the existing security that we have. Prompt injection can't do anything to harm my CRM data if the user that the AI is using doesn't have permissions to do so, right? So those are all things that really push to limit prompt injection. The other thing I'll say that I think is an act now high risk is automated output without human review. I think this is a hard, fast rule across AI usage with agents. Never write client emails, push to production with code, manipulate data in production without human in the loop review. I think that is just a hard and fast rule that everyone's going to have to adopt, because when you combine that with prompt injection, that's when things can get really dangerous. So you really are tackling prompt injection and the security of AI in a two-pronged approach at the input and the output. That's the key. Some additional things I'll call out.
I just totally agree with that. Like going back to the Google Workspace is a perfect example. Don't give it permissions to send the email. Just give it permissions to draft the email. You're going to get You're still going to get a lot of efficiency gains by doing that, but that extra check is going to go a long ways in terms of making sure that there is no way something's going to go out that you haven't reviewed. So it's definitely a big one.
The other couple things I'll call out, API keys and credentials stored in local files. This was a no-no before agents, right? Agents just kind of expose the prompt injection capabilities of leaking your API keys. I will say, though, that this is becoming less frequent. Always leverage standard connectors for the tools that you're utilizing and leverage CLI first when possible. So if you need to interact with Salesforce or you need to interact with Git, I would highly suggest not going the API key route. I would go the CLI route. Much more secure, things that you're doing on your local machine anyway. So those standard connectors have come out and the capabilities of these tools have expanded. It's relying less on, here's my API key, please go use the APIs to fetch this data. That's not occurring as often. But if you're somebody who's utilizing AI that way, that's something you want to go and say, how can I move these API keys not in a local area that's accessible on my folder structure?
Yeah, if you're of the crew that it was a non-developer before, I definitely fall into this camp. But then now you're getting more technical over the years as you're using these tools. It's API key management and credential management and authorization ends up being, if you're trying to add new capabilities or custom capabilities to your agentic operating system, this is like the easiest, or it's the hardest area to get right and the hardest area to develop. And so it's the easiest place to want to take shortcuts, especially if you don't have a background in development. And so here, I think it's just a good reminder, like if you fall into that camp and you're out experimenting, don't take the shortcut here. It's not worth it. Use the recommendations that we've put in place here and you'll be well served long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about what are some things that you could do to mitigate these risks. What are kind of, I would say, 6 principles that may have existed historically, but are now much more important as you implement agents. So the first one I'd say is human in the loop. So this is a new one. Always allow human in the loop, particularly for code pushes and for external communication. Credential hygiene, when we just talked about, make sure that you're utilizing good credential hygiene. You're not storing your credentials in a notebook file, but you're able to access them securely. The other thing I'll say is whitelist trusted extensions. And what I mean by that is this is where you have those public Git repos that could have malicious malware in them, potentially even MCP servers or any external tools that you could download or plug your AI agent into. Just have a company whitelist on what is acceptable, what you're utilizing. A lot of times what we found is start with what's available on the vendors first, and then move out if something's really needed and put some research into what that looks like.
Besides, not just from a security standpoint, but just from a scalability standpoint of your agent systems too. Doing this will go a long ways of just making sure people aren't developing redundant capabilities. Because if you're not forcing people to go look at what's whitelisted already, you're going to find like 3 people go make a different way to make a connection to X, Y, or Z system when Claude Code already has a standard connector, for example. So definitely a good way to go there for sure.
Now, additionally, I would say executing data privacy and training opt-outs. So it's kind of a twofold scenario. With data privacy, I would say not only external vendors, but just making sure that your data itself internally is secure. Again, I'm going to keep calling it out. It's becoming a bigger and bigger issue, but it's always been an issue. You always want security around your fields, your records. But additionally now, there's the concept of training data. So various different models with various different plans will train data that's given into context, or they may have a 0 data retention policy in place. It depends on what plan you're on. Make sure you do the research to understand exactly how you're interacting with AI is protected by a 0 data retention policy if that's something you need. It's not always something that's needed. I think if you're, working on platform code specifically to just implement something that's been implemented many times before, I don't necessarily think that 0 data retention policy is necessary. If you have proprietary software that you don't want these tools to be trained on, that's something that you want to look for a 0 data retention policy.
Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, I think another good one is just setting spending limits. Pretty basic, right? But if you set spending limits, you can do that both with OpenAI and with Anthropic on your subscriptions. Limits themselves will also prevent kind of runaway AI or runaway use cases here from going too far, because you're going to hit a limit and then the model's going to have to stop until it resets, and then being able to set up alerts as well. So I think, that's another really basic one that can really mitigate a lot of risk there, and just know that that's an option kind of with almost any enterprise grade AI dev tool that you're going with right now. But one thing I really thought was interesting from our conversation before, Gavin, was specific examples of prompt injections. So a lot of people talk around prompt injection in pretty broad terms, but maybe give some specific examples of exactly what those actually look like and where people could really look out for those more specifically.
So the ones that we have been focusing on since we do a lot of external communication, the one that I've always kind of put at the forefront is, anytime you have external things like emails, tickets, or web pages that somebody could submit through a website or just directly email your inbox, that input output could have really negative impacts on like making your data external. And it's not even just data, right? You could spoof somebody's email interaction, which could be very dangerous, right? So just having the ability to allow somebody to send an email from your email address could be very dangerous. Same thing with tickets, same thing with web pages. On the other side of this, if you're somebody that works on proprietary software, you're somebody that handles a lot of code and you have a team of developers that interacts with repos, you could see attack surfaces like PR titles and issue descriptions, code comments and README files, and Git commit messages. Right. So you could see commits that hijack pipeline agents, right? So if you have agents that are autonomous reviewing your PRs and your commits, you could potentially see those agents expose your code to external sources, right? And that can be an internal threat as much as it is an external threat, right? So internally, somebody could write into a commit that then pushes that data or that code to an external site. And then your proprietary software is now public, or proprietary data is public to some degree. And then, pretty much anything during code review and this is also, hey, I'm a developer working on some proprietary software, but I've been in the business for a really long time. And I know that I'm going to download locally onto my machine certain tools and repos that I find really powerful to do a specific task. All of that, just like downloading tool sets for an agent, that can be an attack surface as well.
Yep, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, to kind of loop back around to the principles piece of this is, hey, there's a lot of potential, there's things that are overstated we talked around. There's a lot of risks. At the end of the day, there are a lot of the same problems in security concerns that have been plaguing development for many, many years. It's just at a higher velocity and higher volume because more people are developing and more code's getting developed faster. And so there's more to review. And so at the end of the day, putting a good review process in place, recognizing that review process and that human in the loop and some of these basic mitigation mechanisms are there for a real purpose. And then educating your team too on the risk and using these as a way not to dampen the adoption of AI, but to accelerate the adoption of AI because you're doing it in the right way. I think that's kind of the mindset that you really want to kind of take as a business is you don't want to prevent people from going out and experimenting with different solutions. You don't want people to be afraid to use it because of uncertainty or ambiguity. So having conversations around these risks, how to mitigate them, and then putting some of the basic business things in place, like a whitelist, like a training policy, et cetera, a human in the loop rule, those will all help you be able to adopt faster because people know what the expectation is, and you're not actually committing some of the security blunders that, if it happens to you, then really derails and prevents you from continuing to adopt AI because you're putting time into mitigating a security breach. So I think that's the overarching intent. But Gavin, anything else from your side?
I'll just say one of the things that I keep circling back to with AI in general is it comes back to having a plan, performing some sort of implementation. If you're giving these AI tools out and not necessarily thinking, where does this go a year from now? What does our cost look like a year from now? what you're constantly going to be doing is chasing down these security issues. And then once you have those security issues figured out, it's going to be way more expensive than what you originally planned back when you originally released it. So just being able to have an implementation in mind, having an actual journey of where you see your company utilizing its AI strategy over the course of the next year. I know AI is changing rapidly, but it is becoming more important to have an idea because of that. Because as AI changes rapidly, more security risk could be exposed, more ways that the agents could tackle this. Not only security risk, but cost risk, right? So you need to be able to say, this is what the vision looks like, and these are the pathways and the directions we're going to take in order to accomplish that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jim, there's a lot to take in here, and I'm just kind of thinking how I opened with talking about what you're reading on LinkedIn, if that's your source of news when it comes to AI and where I'm sitting today, and just a few things in my life that have made me reflect on this. One is there's still software behind these tools. These software tools keep getting releases as well. So we obviously have been in the Salesforce space for a couple of decades. You sit out there and think about release notes. I don't need to read that. If something bad happens, they'll have a fix. You cannot take your eyes off the road here. Like, you've got to be watching. There's a lot of keys, a lot of back doors that are kind of exposed here. So to Gavin's point, you got to plan this out. And another thing that I think we talk about on the Salesforce side that really, really applies here is the MVP, right? Part of your plan should not be the most comprehensive AI solution as your first release, right? Have some core things, build it, test it, spread it, build on that. Let that help drive where you go next. There's just so many things out there that are changing that are eventually going to make you alter some of the things you've done. But thinking about the news cycle and how fast some of the things age out, I think what I really love about this particular artifact and about this topic is we're giving you concept and a framework that's not going to age out. These rules will apply no matter where the tool goes. So we're talking about harnesses and other things now. Like, yes, some of these things are new topics, but about being safe, about where not to put your API keys, when to use CLI. These are all principles that some terminology may change, but the concept of what we're trying to give you guidance on how to navigate this is not. So some really good takeaway points here. Again, there's a lot of technical terminology here. And if you're beginning on your journey, some of this might have gone over your head. This is why we make artifacts. We want you to be able to download this. You can reference and use when you get around to some of these things. And last but not least, if you find yourself in that conversation, you go, I still don't get it. What do I do? You reach out to us, CirriusTalk at CirriusSolutions.com. We would love to have a chance to talk through your strategy, your plan, and anything we can do to help support you in that. So Tim, Gavin, thank you guys as always. Really appreciate the visionary approach y'all are taking to this. We truly walk this talk every day with what we're doing, how we're doing it, both internally and for our clients. So thank you guys for coming here today. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Rick.
Have a good one.
Thanks for joining us today on CirriusTalk Agentic AI. A real thank you to Tim Harding and Gavin Franklin for cutting through the noise on this one. The line that stuck with me, using AI does not absolve you of the work it produces in your name. Most of the security problems people fear are existing problems, just showing up faster at a higher volume. And the fix is in the discipline we already know. Validate the source, keep a human in the loop for code pushes and outbound communication, mind your credentials, and build an implementation plan before you scale, not after. If your team's wrestling with where to draw these lines, do not do it in the dark. Send this episode to one engineering leader or security owner who's trying to read the temperature of AI adoption right now. It might save them a weekend spent cleaning up a breach. If this was useful, please follow the show. Leave us a quick review so more teams can find it. A sincere thank you goes out to Jason Fowler for letting us use his song, Mystery Road. If you have any questions or want help shaping your AI strategy, reach us at CirriusTalk at CirriusSolutions.com. Until next time, adopt with intention, keep a human in the loop, and keep building with confidence.